Hello and welcome to More Tea Minister. My name is Ian. Today we are doing a 3 tea review. They're all connected. They're all teas based on the Jin Xuan cultivar, and they're all higher altitude teas from Taiwan. Specifically, we have from mountain stream teas to begin with here, Alishan Firefly Mountain Oolong, which is Jin Xuan. It's a winter harvest tea from November 2025, that's last year. And specifically from the website rather than the packaging here, it's Meishan. It's at 1300 meters. Next, we have Coastal Mountain Deep Water Oolong. This is a spring harvest as well. This is from April, specifically April the 20th. Again, from Mountain Stream Teas. It's Jin Xuan. This is from Hualien. This is from the Eastern Coastal Mountain Range, if I remember what the website was saying. So that's an area that's new to me. And finally, this came as a free sample with a purchase. This is Yushan Jin Xuan. So that's Jade Mountain Yushan in Taiwan. It's Yushan Mountain Oolong 2025. And this is from May. So that's a spring harvest tea as well. So spring, 2 springs, 1 winter, 2 vendors as well. So I never really intended to kind of group some other teas together, but I found that I had a fair few Jin Xuan mountain teas that I thought we would look at together all at the same time. So this is going to be a lengthy video, buckle up, because we're going to have a Western teapot review of all 3 teas, thankfully at the same time, then 3 Gongfu sessions. Next, we're going to take a look at the tea leaves for all 3. We're not going to take a look at the packaging because one of them is a sample packaging, and I don't know how much detail you would get for this tea if it was a larger portion. So we'll just stick to looking at the teas. So let's move on to part 2. See you in a mo. So here we are looking at the first of the 3 teas that we are reviewing today. This is Alishan Firefly Mountain Oolong from Mountain Stream Teas. Specifically, it's from the Meishan region of Alishan. Looking at the tea beads, as I like to call them, they're relatively uniform in colour. The only kind of distinctiveness in the colour looks as if it comes from where stem material is folded into the bead. Otherwise, it's a very, very uniform dark green with some slight patches of lighter green shading, as you can see on the screen. The beads themselves are a relatively uniform size, varying somewhere between 3 to, I would say, 6 millimeters, with some variation and some slightly fragmentary parts. The smell of the tea, of the dry leaves, a combination of a lovely sweetness plus something of that characteristic Jin Xuan, slightly creamy dairy character. It's a very light sweetness. It's not syrupy and it's not dark or treacly. It's almost... Now I think about it, there's a certain fruit element to it, although it'd be hard pressed to say what fruit, but it's a kind of fruity sweetness along with the Jin Xuan quality. Now let's move on to the next tea. Here we are looking at the Coastal Mountain Deep Water Oolong from Mountain Stream Teas. This is slightly different from it's from the Eastern Coastal Mountain Range, which is not an area that, as far as I'm aware, that we've looked at before. According to the label, it's Qikashan from Hualien. Once again, it's Jin Xuan. Looking at the tea beads, they're definitely smaller than the previous sample we were looking at, although equally relatively uniform in colour, predominantly dark green. Once again, it looks as if the only parts that aren't dark green are the stem material folded into the bead. Other than that, relatively uniform in colour, and I would say in size as well, averaging between 3 to 5, so pretty uniform there. The smell of the dry leaves, a slight sweetness, but almost a savoury note as well. Yeah, sweet and savoury. I'm not really picking up that standard Jin Xuan character unless it's folded into that sweetness. So let's move on to the third tea we're looking at. And here we are looking at the Yushan Jin Xuan Oolong 2025 from eherbata of Poland. Should point out they are all 2025, though from different times of the year. This is from May of 2025. We'll come through all of these details once again just when we come to brewing the tea. Let's start with the smell, given I've got the packet open in my hand. Almost spicy, sweet and spicy. That's a really interesting kind of smell. Yeah, sweet and spicy, I would say. The beads are, once again, uniform in colour and in size, 1 or 2 stonkers. Even the stem material seems to be quite green in this example, so relatively uniform in size and in colour. Fantastic. Let's move on to brewing these 3 teas. Back in a mo. Hello and welcome to part 3A of our video, where we are going to have a teapot brewing review of our 3 teas for today. There's a reason for the 4th tea that you can see over here, which I'll explain in a moment. So here we have the Alishan Firefly Milk Oolong. Specifically, it's from Meishan, and it's a winter harvest, November 2025. We have here the Yushan Jin Xuan from 2025, and that's from May, so that's a spring harvest. Then over here we have the coastal Mountain Deep Water Oolong, which is from April the 20th, 2025, to be very specific. And that is obviously another spring harvest. And over here, I have a completely different tea. It's not one that I'm intending to review today because I have already reviewed it. It's a Meishan Jin Xuan from spring of last year as well. So that's a spring 2025 to kind of give me a point of reference for the winter 2025 from Alishan and Meishan specifically. So let's start with the Alishan Firefly. All of these teas, including the reference tea, have all been brewed to the same parameters. 3 grams of tea, 250 ml of water at 95 degrees centigrade for 3 minutes. So let's see how this has come out. I will say that the Yushan Jin Xuan, the leaves unfurled or rehydrated, probably the fastest, and then I would say it was the coastal Mountain Deep Water and then the Alishan. And the Meishan, I think, was pretty much the same as the winter. So let's have a look at our 3 teas. I don't know if you can tell from here, but I've got the packaging behind me, because once I got up to 3, or 4, I really worried I'd lose track of which tea was which. So let's take a look at the colour of the winter Alishan Firefly. That's really what you're looking at there. A nice dark yellow colour, I would say. That's really sweet. And a bit of fruit in there as well. Oh, and there's definitely some of that Jin Xuan character underneath it. So it's sweet, it's fruity, and there's Jin Xuan underneath all of that. This is the Yushan. Colour-wise, it looks, first glance, slightly paler than the one we've just looked at, and I'd say it is. It's still a good yellow colour, but it isn't quite as deep a yellow. And the smell for this Yushan, do you know there's almost a sort of roasted note to that? I do sometimes note that Yushan teas are baked or not baked. I confess I didn't check. I'll have a look and make sure I put something in the description notes if it says whether it's baked or not. But it's sweet and there's a baked note. Maybe a slight hint of the Jin Xuan in the background there. And finally, the coastal Mountain Deep Water. I would say that's, well, let's have a look at the colour. I would say, do you know, funnily enough, yeah, if we hold it steady, it's much the same colour as the Yushan. When we do this, it looks like it's slightly paler, and it really isn't. So it's the same colour as the Yushan, a nice yellow, but not quite as deep a colour as the Alishan Firefly. The smell, well, it's really fruity, but more like a dark fruit. Yeah, that's almost like a kind of plum, something like that, like a red fruit, that's what it is. And maybe a hint of the Jin Xuan as well. There's a lot of the Jin Xuan coming through on this, and that's fruity as well. I think, is this the fruity one? Yeah. So let's, oh, and finally, point of reference, the spring Meishan. Fair bit of the Jin Xuan. Colour-wise, they'd say the same as the Alishan. Sweet, not really getting much else. So let's now move on to taste the Alishan Firefly. Fruit and Jin Xuan and sweetness in the cup. Full of mouthfeel. Full of that Jin Xuan mouthfeel. It's definitely sweet. It's definitely fruity. They were a bit more subtle than on I was going to say the jug, but you know what I mean, you get the idea. The brewing vessel. But flavour isn't dropping off. The sweetness and some of that Jin Xuan is staying there. So that's been brewed in a way that fits the tea. It's sweet and there's a bit of fruit and lots of mouthfeel and some Jin Xuan kind of taste to it as well. That's absolutely fantastic. I'm going to clean the cup rather than replicating work. Let's go with the Yushan. I was going to go with the spring one, but that's just a frame of reference for afterwards. That poured better than it did the other day when I was using it. Yeah, but that bait note's coming right through. Some Jin Xuan mouthfeel, it's sort of complementing that baked aspect very nicely. I'm not confirming yet that it is baked, but that's how it tastes. So the mouthfeel there, not as intense as the winter one, but it's really complementing that baked note really nicely. And there's a bit of sweetness in there as well, which again, yeah, you can get there, the sweet and the baked coming through really strongly in the cup. Yeah, that's really nice. Sweet, baked, with Jin Xuan mouthfeel complementing the whole. Not too much of a Jin Xuan taste to it, but really good. And let's try the Coastal Mountain Deep Water Oolong. This one is apparently a bit different, and you can get, from the description, something oceanic out of it, almost like a saline hit. A little savoury on the note, on the cup. Loads of Jin Xuan mouthfeel. It is sweet and it's fruity, and it is a darker kind of sweetness, a darker kind of fruitiness. Maybe if we weren't going to talk about the particular kind of fruit, you could perhaps get away with saying it's sort of a syrup note. Not in texture, but a syrup note rather than just plain sweetness. Yeah, I think I'd be more comfortable saying something like that. Now, purely as a frame of reference, and perhaps don't even need to pour this out, this is the spring Meishan. Lots of mouthfeel. A little sweet, not a great deal of fruit. So let's go back to the winter. It's a little sweeter and definitely fruitier, and there's even more mouthfeel. So, and I would say for all of them, those brewing parameters have been pretty good. I don't feel as if any of them, the flavours dropped off or been too thin, which again is a very good sign. Certainly I would say the Meishan ones have had more mouthfeel. The Yushan has got a note, a kind of a baked note that really adds to the Jin Xuan mouthfeel. And over here, the Coastal Mountain Deep Water, I like that more syrupy kind of sweetness, a slightly darker sweet taste, which goes very nicely with the Jin Xuan flavour. Just a touch and a good deal of the mouthfeel as well. So I think we'll move on to our final part where we're going to do 3 Gongfus. And I think we won't do the same for the Meishan. I think what I've picked up is that the Meishan has you get more fruit and more sweet in the winter version. So let's move on to the next stage of our review. See you in a mo. Hello and welcome to the next part of our video, where we're going to have a Gongfu session to review Alishan Firefly Oolong from 2025 in November 2025, so it's a winter harvest from Mountain Stream Teas. So this is the one that's in some respects more familiar because we've already looked at a couple of, well, two Alishan Jin Xuan Oolongs already. And if you include the reference tea from a much earlier in this, the life of this channel, then even earlier still. So I'm going to cut to the chase because we've got 3 sessions to get through for this view. 3 grams of tea, 50 mils per steeping, 95 degrees centigrade for the water. Everything is pre-steeped. So let's make a start. Not sure how quickly these will react, so we're going to look at them at 20, see if they need maybe up to 30. Let's go. Not much popping so far, plenty of movement, but not much popping. So let's see where we get to. So coming up for 20 seconds. A little bit of sweetness, but I think 30 is more likely to be our friend at the very least. Let's see where we get to. No, let's go with 35. 35. Okay, on the lid. Do you know that's quite complex already? There's some of the Jin Xuan milkiness and some sweetness already. That's really impressive, considering that's only a first steeping. Colour-wise, still quite pale, obviously, reasonably. White tea colour, I would say, that kind of silvery colour with a hint of yellow thrown in. There's there's a Jin Xuan note to the fore, but it's more blended in with a kind of vegetal note. I think it's all the one flavour profile. And a little bit of sweetness. The same, the sweetness and some Jin Xuan already. Some mouthfeel. Flavour's a little thin, reasonably enough. But definitely some mouthfeel, a little bit of sweet, and a hint of actual kind of Jin Xuan flavour. So let's take that up to, I think we'll go with 50 seconds for this one. If you would take a look at the leaves, a little bit of sweetness, but as you can see, they're really not very steeped at all. So let's do this for 50. Maybe looking at 35. Some of the stems are rehydrated, so at least there's some kind of movement, if you want to put it that way. So, another good, use that Scottish word again, give it a good shoogle. And see where we are. Let's make a start at 35 to see how it's coming along. Leaves are definitely more steeped, but let's push for the 50. Stop fidgeting, Ian. If I've noticed I'm fidgeting, I dread to think what other people are thinking. Sweet, vegetal. I would say that's a sort of predominant note. Definitely more colour. moved away from the white tea into sort of a pale yellow directly. Ooh, lots of Jin Xuan on the nose and sweetness. But again, you have a sense that the Jin Xuan smell, how can I phrase this? As if whatever contributes that flavor is contributing other elements at the same time, or it's all part of a structure of a bigger flavor profile or scent profile. Loads on the cup. It's almost puddingy. A deep kind of dairy taste. Still a little thin on the flavour, although you'd be satisfied with that. And the mouthfeel is there in the background, tying it all together. The leaves, really just getting sweetness. They soften considerably, but they're still looking pretty wrinkled. They're going to need, well, let's go with 30 again and see where that gets us, but it might be up to 50 or longer. There we go. And we're definitely not going to go with a fourth steep for any of these because there's so many of them, so I can turn that off so the kettle's not rumbling at me. And hopefully we can get these up and running nice and quickly. Let's check in on at 30. No, leaves are pretty steeped, but I'm not smelling anything distinctive. 40? Let's push to 45. No, 50. And 50. Jin Xuan's come back, definitely with a kind of sweet vegetable note to it. The leaves, still not fully steeped, but the stalks are definitely steeped, definitely softened. If I hold you one out, you can see we're not quite there yet. So let's see what we're like on the smell and the colour. More green to that now. I would say that is, trying to get a natural colour for you. Yellow with a hint of green. Load to Jin Xuan again. And some of that fruit. The fruit's finally kind of coming through in the background. So let's see where we are here. It's a lot more complex on the lid, on the cup, should I say. Mouthfeel fruity, definitely fruity, and sweet. All tying together very nicely. I'm not sure there's much in the way of the Jin Xuan flavour in that, but the mouthfeel is still there, really tying everything very nicely together. It's not drying, flavour's lasting. I think that's a sweet spot. You got, Jin Xuan flavour coming in at the end. There's Jin Xuan mouthfeel, there's sweetness, there's a bit of fruit. So the mouthfeel, the majority of the mouthfeel seems to come through, I would say, the first steep, quite a short one, and into the second. After that, it's less mouthfeel, but it's tying everything else together very nicely, and the fruit and the sweets coming through on that final steeping. So let's move on to our next Gongfu, which we will do the Yushan Jin Xuan. So back in a moment. Hello and welcome to the next part of our video, which is our Gongfu session to review Yushan Jin Xuan Oolong 2025 from eherbata or eherbata, which I think translates as ET or ETs from the Polish. If anybody ever notices and finds I've made a terrible injustice, please do let me know. For all of these three teas, just a quick reminder, 3 grams of tea, 95 degrees centigrade for the kettle, and 50 mils of water per session. The last tea, the steeps were pretty lengthy. I think it was 35, 50 and 50. So, but these leaves on the western, the teapot brewing, did seem to react more quickly. So we may start looking at about 2025, and I expect to see a bit more change than with the other one. So let's make a start. Everything pre-warmed, as always. 50 mils. I did do some, not really research, I had a look at the website for the vendor, and though it doesn't mention that whether the tea is baked or otherwise, it does point out that there's a very strong butter cookie kind of aroma to the leaves, and I think that's what's come through for me on the taste as well. So let's have a look at this tea at 30. Still not a great deal of movement on the leaves, if you see what I mean. When I push that to 40, they really don't look particularly steep. So this is 40. Little bit of sweet and little bits of cereal, which would make sense if there's a sort of baked element to the scent and the flavour. First steeping, so no surprise that that's pretty pale. That's silver tea, that's white tea, kind of a silvery colour, even without the kind of yellow tinge this time. Definitely kind of baked element, kind of baked cookie kind of note. Not picking up any sort of butteriness though. That kind of dairy buttery aspect. Although funnily enough, it's there on the cup. It's so, maybe that's what the butter's coming from. It really is like a cookie. It's remarkable. Flavor's a little thin, but it's definitely like a cookie. That's fantastic stuff. So let's see if we can get that to steep. That was, I can't remember what that was, but we'll take a look at 30, maybe 35. The leaves are more sweet than anything else, although maybe you can see they are pretty much just sort of like swollen beads at this point, although the stalks are rehydrated, perhaps unsurprisingly. Let's take a look at this at 35. I think that's quite 50. There we go. So we will have a quick look. This was never intended to be a sort of close-up at Jin Xuan. A lot of the teas I bought at the back end of 2025 were all so that I could do what I've called the Qing Xin files. And yet I find myself, ironically here, trying to do the same with Jin Xuan. Let's just take that to 40, actually. That's looking a little better steeped. Sweet, a sort of a vegetal sweetness. That baked quality is still there. More of the Jin Xuan milky and butteriness is coming through on the wet leaf aroma. Still not tremendously well steeped. Let's actually just lift some out and take a look. No, see, that one's still beaded. So let's move on to the colour. Still a kind of white tea colour, hint of yellow in it this time. Bit of baked quality in there, but not much else. I think I really need to give this a much longer steep. Just to try and do justice to the leaf. Quite complex on the cup. Back to the baked and some sweetness in there. Oh, the mouthfeel is there. Oh wow, that's a nice dose of Jin Xuan mouthfeel. Bit of sweet, and that baked is there. As with the Western, oh, actually there's something almost right at the back there. I said that the wet leaf had a kind of sweet perfumey notes. I mean, they often do, but that's actually come through on the taste. Right at the back there, there's something sweet and perfumey. Oh, that's really good. And the flavour isn't dropping off, so we're kind of getting there. I'm going to assume 35 at the very least, and see where that gets us. Sorry for the scraping noise, but if the lid isn't sitting straight, I'm not saying it makes any difference to how the tea brews, but it offends my my sense of things being right in the world. And I've just noticed that the photograph, the picture frame behind me, either that's not straight or, well, something's not right because it's not lining up straight with the top of my camera. It's these little things that annoy me. Coming up for 40. Let's push that to 45 just to play it safe. I really want to do this justice. In fact, no, 50. 50. Let's not mess about. The tea did brew a lot more quickly in Western. So I've been kind of slightly put off by how this isn't reacting as quickly. Gongfu. Vegetal and sweet. Once again, that kind of cereally note is there. The leaves are looking a lot more. That's better. Once again, that kind of very intense sweetness. Oh, you can see, there we go. That's really steep that time. Let me show you. There you go. Much better. And the colour. Yes, I know that isn't a colour. I'm just sniffing it first. Sweet. Some of that baked aspect to it, but it's mostly sweet. Well, actually, there's a hint of fruit in there. There's something. There we go. That's a sort of pale yellow, silvery yellow. So let's see where that takes us. Mostly just a very intense sweetness on the cup. Nice Jin Xuan mouthfeel, still baked. Still kind of buttery baked quality. Not much sweet. It's almost becoming savoury with that baked quality and the Jin Xuan mouthfeel. So, although the leaves are now looking more steeped, I reckon either the first or the second steeping could have been longer. Although most of the leaves have kind of unfurled by this point. The flavour's not dropping off, but is it still a little thinner otherwise? It's not a reflection on the tea. It's not as intense as I feel it could be. So maybe I've added a bit too much water on that last steep. It's hard to tell. But the flavour it's a really complex flavour. There's a bit of that perfumey note in the second steep. The Jin Xuan mouthfeel's coming through the second and the third. The baked quality is the strongest in the first and the second, although I've still got it. So sweet and perfumey and baked still in the palate. So that's really good showing. So let's move on to our third and final Gongfu session, where we are going to look at the coastal mountain tea. Back in a moment. Hello and welcome to the final part of our video. This is 3C, if I understand correctly. No, 3D, if you include the Western teapot brewing part of the video. So, as always, 95 degrees centigrade, 3 grams of tea, 50 mils per steeping. I think this tea, the Coastal Mountain Deep Water Oolong, responded Western style, teapot style, much the same as the Alishan Firefly. So we might be in store for a slightly longer steeping per session, per round. So everything's pre-warmed. Let's make a start. We'll aim for 30, maybe 40. We're looking at 30. Not much popping, but the leaves are moving around. So I was saying, working through these Jin Xuans, I hadn't realized I had so many mountain, higher altitude Jin Xuans still to review. So I thought I would do them as a group after the previous ones. 35, nice and sweet. I think we might take that to 50. The leaves are looking pretty not unfurled, not rehydrated. So we're coming up for 50. And 50. Little bit of sweetness. Little bit of Jin Xuan butteriness, but as you can see, those beads really are not unfurled at all, not even the stalks. So we'll definitely have to push that maybe up to a minute, the next one. That said, there is a nice bit of colour to that already. That's more yellow than a straight up white tea kind of silvery colour. So that's very promising. In fact, there's a touch of green in there. As with the Firefly, I think, whichever one it was, the Jin Xuan quality is clearly, in a scent way, it's clearly connected with a vegetal kind of note as well, because once again, there's vegetal leading into the Jin Xuan. But it's definitely there. Not much sweetness, but some of that Jin Xuan butter is there. Wow. And that's a first steeping and the leaves aren't really unfurled. So let's try that. Sweet and buttery on the cup. Mouthfeel is there already. Thin, I can tell the flavour is thin. Loads of mouthfeel already. Wow. Once again, a thin mouthfeel is in no way a reflection on the tea. Really, that's just what I'm getting at the minute, because the leaves are barely hydrated. We've really only got Jin Xuan mouthfeel coming out at the minute. So we might even push this to a minute. But that was extraordinary to get that much mouthfeel already. But I think that's what happened with the first one. Incidentally, this is a spring one. So the Alishan Firefly was a winter. The Yushan is a spring, and this is a spring as well. It's all from 2025, last year at the time of recording. But that's interesting to note that it sometimes feels like you're doing, I don't know if you did it at school, anybody's watching, fractional distillation, where you're trying to take out one element at a time, and you feel as if you're doing that with these snapshots of Gongfu. And it's interesting that Jin Xuan is linked with a kind of vegetal note. So we're going to take this to a minute, see if that helps with the leaves, and 60 seconds. Or 1 minute, if you prefer. Little more complex sweetness. It's not purely vegetal. And a bit of that butteriness, that Jin Xuan character. Lots of colour already. That is yellowy green. The leaves, ooh, they're almost puddingy because they're sweet and there's that Jin Xuan butter all at the same time. Still not tremendously steeped, less than 50% I would say. Vegetal, creamy, sweet, not getting any of that kind of syrupy or dark sweetness. So maybe that'll come through on a prolonged third steeping. Although there's something, funnily enough, now it's all together, there's something kind of fruity and sweet. Definitely on the cup. Mouthfeel, fruit, hint of that fruit, and sweet. Still a little thin, but again, no reflection on the tea. Still a goodly amount of the mouthfeel. Right, I'm going to take this to a minute at the very least. And hopefully we can just push it long enough to extract the flavour without pushing it to the point where we're starting to cook it or we're getting any kind of bitterness. There hasn't been any bitterness in this tea in the throughout this review. Not the Western tea / Teapot-Style, not the Gongfu, nothing. So, and I've still got a mouthful of sort of buttery, cookie sweetness. It's fantastic. But no, we haven't pushed any of these teas too far at all. But I feel we've got the maximum mouthfeel out of them, which is very good. Nothing much there. It's become a little bit drying, but let's see where we get. I might take this to 110. I didn't feel I gave the Yushan long enough, so let's see if I can give this long enough with 1:10. That's quite lengthy. There's 1:10. Definitely more intense colour. There's fruit, bit of fruit in the background there, and something of that slightly darker kind of sweetness. Colour-wise, gold. Yeah, just straight up gold. It's interesting that despite the leaves not being that unfurled, that rehydrated to start with, loads of colour coming out. Those leaves, as you can tell, are pretty much, well, they're definitely re-steeped. Trying to see if that's true of all of them, or whether, do you know, there's a couple of that are down here that are still beads. So there's a lot more still to give. Sweetened vegetal. That's a aroma of the wet leaves. Ooh, butter. Loads of butter. Loads and loads of butter and sweetness. It occurred to me just then that the Jin Xuan seems to come through more, at least the mouthfeel, as the tea cools. So I wanted to know if it made much difference if you let it cool a bit with a scent. Sweet, fruity, pretty complex. Not really getting the fruit. It's sweet. It all fits together very nicely. I think that's about as far as you could push it at that duration, at that temperature. That's about as far as you can push the tea. Creaminess, but it's become very drying. Again, I'm just trying to experiment. How do we get the most out of the tea? So for this one, the Coastal Mountain Deep Water, the first and the second steepings, you were getting the sweetness and the buttery mouthfeel. Third one, perhaps put the temperature up, but drop the duration. Again, just trying to get the best out of the tea. I think also, now that it's been sitting on the palate for a little while, I think what I'm getting is something of the oceanic quality. There's a kind of savouriness. It's not bitter at all. We haven't reached bitterness, but there is definitely a kind of savoury quality to it that isn't baked as such. It's not like the Yushan where it tastes, true or not, like something that's been baked. It's just got a sort of savouriness. I'm assuming that's what the oceanic thing is, and that's coming through there. Hence, there's not much in the way of sweetness. It goes very nicely with the Jin Xuan mouthfeel. So, moving on to review these teas, or at least think about how we might put them together. I'm always chary when I'm looking at teas from different vendors, two vendors in this case. about making direct comparisons in case somebody thinks I am saying this vendor has got a better product than another, and I really don't want to do that. I'm not qualified for one thing. However, they're all bringing something very different to the table. That one in that last steeping especially, that rich kind of savouriness to it, that's really notable. Goes very nicely with the Jin Xuan. The Yushan has got that baked quality, that really kind of buttery, biscuity, cookie quality throughout all the steepings. And the first one has got that sweetness and loads of Jin Xuan mouthfeel and taste. So that's all fitting together very nice. All bringing something different. Now, how available are they? Well, we've already seen you can get Alishan Jin Xuan lots of places. We're being a bit more specific here, not just Alishan. So if you started looking for high mountain Jin Xuan, you'll come across a lot of Shanlin Shi ones. Not that any of these are Shanlin Shi. Yushan teas are a little more elusive, but they've all got some wonderful taste to them. Just try to prolong the steeping on the Yushan. I think that's really all you need to do, and maybe give the Yushan and the coastal mountain slightly longer steeps. Let's leave to one side availability because we're dealing with different vendors, and you can certainly get high mountain Jin Xuans in lots of places. So in that respect, hopefully this has been of some interest and use to anybody who sees this, and it only remains for me to say happy steeping, party recommendation by the way, and God bless.